February 20th, 1942, 12:47 a.m., Warren, Michigan. Snow presses flat against the blacktop. Floodlights hum above a factory so large it bends the night around it. Inside, the air smells of hot steel and cutting oil. The sound never fully stops. At the far end of the floor, a foreman named Frank Donnelly checks his watch. He does this every hour on the hour, not out of habit, out of pressure. Somewhere in North Africa, men are fighting. Somewhere in the Pacific, ships are burning. And here, Frank has been told that if everything works, a tank will roll off this line every 60 minutes. Not tomorrow, tonight. This is the Detroit Arsenal Tank Plant, and it is still learning how to do something no one has ever done before. Build war at the speed of industry. Frank steps onto the concrete. A half-finished tank hull sits under a crane, its steel skin pale and raw. Sparks drift down like brief stars. "Keep it moving," he says, calm but tight. A year ago, most of these workers were building cars. Now they are here, hands memorizing motions they once thought impossible. A young woman named Eleanor Price tightens bolts along the suspension. She has learned that the line does not forgive hesitation. Above them, a banner stretches across steel beams. Speed is life. It is not a slogan, it is a warning. At 12:59, a bell rings. The line shudders forward. 1 hour, 1 tank. That is the goal. The tank itself, what will soon be known as the Embauer Sherman, is not born here as a legend. It is born as a problem. Too heavy, too slow to produce, too many parts. Failure, right now, has a body count. Frank remembers the first weeks, how nothing fit, how engineers argued while machines sat silent. The idea was simple. Treat tanks like automobiles. Break the machine into steps. Standardize everything. But tanks are not cars. Steel this thick does not bend politely. At one station, a crane lowers an engine block. The operator pauses. 1 inch too far left and the line will stop. The room seems to hold its breath. The engine settles. Metal meets metal. The line moves again. They are not building a single tank. They are building a system that must never stop. Outside, freight cars wait with steel from Pennsylvania and engines from Indiana. Everything must arrive exactly when needed. At 1:15 a.m., a finished tank rolls free of the line, its paint still wet. The turret turns once, slow and deliberate, as if waking up. Frank watches it pass and allows himself a single breath. Then he looks at his watch again. Another hour has already begun. Because if this factory can truly learn to build a tank every hour, the war will never again be fought only at the front. It will be fought here, under lights, against the clock. March 5th, 1942. 6:30 a.m., same floor, same lights, less patience. The tank line is moving, but not cleanly. It never is. Frank Donnelly stands near Station 7 with a clipboard he does not remember picking up. A hull has stopped short, not broken, not damaged, just wrong. The holes do not line up, a fraction of an inch off, but enough to halt everything behind it. The sound drops away in stages. One machine powers down, then another. Silence spreads like a stain. Frank rubs his eyes. He has slept 4 hours. "This one came from Cleveland," someone says. Frank does not answer. He already knows what that means. The idea of building a tank every hour was sold in Washington with clean charts and confident voices. What they did not say, what they could not say, was that no one had ever tried to force dozens of independent factories to behave like a single machine. Every bolt supplier had their own tolerances. Every foundry cut steel slightly differently. Every blueprint carried assumptions made by men who had never watched a line stop cold. The M4 Sherman was supposed to be standardized. Instead, it arrived in pieces that argued with each other. At a folding table near the wall, an engineer named Robert Hale flips through drawings, jaw tight. He came from Detroit's car plants, where variation is tolerated because the customer never sees it. A misaligned trim piece does not get someone killed. Here, it does. "We fix this here," someone mutters. Robert shakes his head. "If we fix it here, the next one will be wrong in a different way." He knows the truth, even if no one wants to hear it. You cannot correct chaos at the end of the line. You have to hunt it back to the source. By noon, Frank is in a meeting room with no windows. Coffee sits untouched. The walls are covered in chalk marks and pinned memos. Men argue, then stop arguing, then argue again. Someone suggests slowing the line. No one writes it down. The war is moving faster than their pride. Word comes down from Washington, carried by clipped voices and tight smiles. The Army does not want explanations. It wants numbers, tanks by the thousand. Tanks ready to ship, ready to fight, ready to replace losses that arrive on casualty lists weeks before anyone can read them. Robert leans back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He has an idea. It is not elegant. It is not cheap. But it might work. "Freeze the design," he says quietly. The room stills. Freeze means no changes, no improvements, no clever fixes halfway through production. Every bolt, every bracket, every weld locked in place. But the tank isn't perfect, someone says. Robert nods. Neither is the war. The decision takes less than 10 minutes, not because everyone agrees, but because time has run out. From that moment on, the Sherman becomes something new, not a prototype, not a promise, a repeatable object. The changes ripple outward fast. Suppliers are told to retool or be replaced. Drawings are reissued with brutal clarity. Tolerances shrink. Inspections increase. Some factories fail the new standard and disappear from the chain overnight. On the floor, Eleanor Price notices the difference first. Parts begin to arrive that fit without persuasion. Her wrench moves smoother. The rhythm returns. She still works fast, but now she works sure. Frank walks the line with fewer interruptions. He stops carrying the clipboard. He no longer needs it. By April, the bell rings and no one flinches. 1 hour, 1 tank. The factory does not celebrate. It recalculates. Because building 1 tank every hour is not the end goal. It is proof that the system can hold. And now that it holds, they intend to stretch it. Night shifts expand. Training accelerates. Men and women rotate through stations until each motion is muscle memory. A broken arm is replaced. A sick day absorbed. The line does not stop. Somewhere, Robert watches a Sherman roll out, paint gleaming, serial numbers stenciled sharp. He knows what critics will say, that the tank is undergunned, that it burns too easily, that it is not the best. He also knows this one fact. There will be another behind it, and another, and another. War is not won by the perfect machine arriving too late. It is won when the imperfect one arrives everywhere, all the time. Outside, flat cars wait. Crews chain the tanks down. Whistles blow. Trains pull east, then south, then toward ports whose names appear on maps with red circles around them. The Sherman leaves the factory anonymous. By the time it reaches the front, it will have a crew. Scars, a story. But it all begins here, with a line that learned the hard way that speed does not come from rushing. It comes from control. June 18th, 1942. 4:10 a.m. A rail yard outside Detroit. The train shudders to life in the dark. Steam lifts and thins as the cars begin to roll. Each flat car carries the same weight, 30 tons of steel, balanced and chained. Identical silhouettes passing under yellow lamps like shadows cut from the same mold. The tanks look finished. They are not. Back at the plant, Frank Donnelly knows this. He has learned that building the tank is only the loudest part of the job. The quieter work, the work that never appears in photographs, is what keeps the line breathing. Every Sherman depends on an invisible army. Rubber shipments arrive at midnight, time to miss traffic. Ammunition racks come in crates, stenciled wrong, and must be remarked by hand. Radios show up late, then early, then not at all. Somewhere in Ohio, a strike nearly breaks the rhythm. Somewhere in New Jersey, a flood washes out a bridge. None of it is dramatic on its own. All of it can stop a war. In an office above the floor, Margaret Lewis sits with a phone pressed hard to her ear. She's not famous. No one will write her name down. But she knows where every piece is supposed to be, and she knows exactly how long the line can survive without it. Route it through Toledo, she says, pencil already moving. I don't care if it costs more. She hangs up and exhales once. There is no second breath. Margaret tracks steel like a general tracks divisions. She does not talk about patriotism. She talks about schedules. She knows that a missing bearing can idle 1,000 workers and that idled workers lose rhythm. Rhythm, once lost, is hard to recover. On the floor, Eleanor hears the change in sound before anyone tells her. The line speeds up, not by much, but enough to feel. A few seconds shaved here, a pause eliminated there. The machine grows confident. So do the people inside it. New workers arrive every week. Teenagers. Older men pulled from retirement, women who had never held a torque wrench before March. They learn by watching hands, not reading manuals. Mistakes still happen. A dropped tool, a misaligned plate. But the line absorbs it now. There are buffers, redundancies, quiet fixes that keep the bell ringing on time. At 6 a.m., Frank walks past a bulletin board. Someone has pinned a newspaper clipping. A photograph of American troops overseas, standing beside Shermans dusted pale with sand. The headline is small. Almost shy, Frank does not stop. He cannot afford to. The factory has become a living schedule, stretching far beyond its walls. Ports are expanded. Ships are modified to carry tanks nose to tail. Crews train on vehicles that do not exist yet, learning controls from diagrams and wooden mock-ups. By the time a Sherman reaches them, it should feel familiar. That is the promise. In a quiet corner of the plant, Robert Hale studies reports from the field. Breakdowns, fires, complaints. He reads them all. He writes notes in the margins. Some changes are approved, most are not. Because every improvement risks breaking the spell. The Sherman is not sacred. The system is. If you slow the line to make one tank better, you make every other tank worse by arriving too late. This is the math no one likes. It is also the math that wins. At 7:30 a.m., a whistle blows. Another train pulls out. Another column of steel heads toward water and salt air. Margaret checks her board. Green marks dominate now. The red ones are fewer. She allows herself a sip of coffee, already cold. She thinks, briefly, of the men who will drive these machines. She does not picture battles. She pictures routes. She hopes the tanks arrive, when needed, not after. By summer's end, the numbers stop surprising anyone. One plant becomes several. One shift becomes 3. The idea spreads, carried by results. Factories across the country reconfigure themselves around the same discipline. Same parts, same drawings, same relentless clock. The United States does not outgun the world yet, but it is learning how to outbuild it. And somewhere between a rail yard and a harbor, under a sky just beginning to pale, another Sherman passes unseen, one more piece of a force that does not announce itself, until it arrives everywhere at once. October 23rd, 1942, 2:15 p.m., outside El Alamein, Egypt. The desert hums with heat even as the sun begins to slide. Engines idle in shallow scrapes carved into hard ground. Dust coats everything, boots, faces, metal, until color feels like a memory. Inside one Sherman, Sergeant Tom Walker wipes sweat from his eyes with the back of his glove. The tank smells of oil and canvas and something sharp he cannot name. It is new, barely broken in. The paint still looks too clean for this place. Tom taps the radio housing, a habit he picked up without knowing why. It works. That alone feels like a small miracle. He does not know Frank Donnelly. He has never heard of Margaret Lewis. He does not care where the tank was built. What matters is that when he turns the starter, the engine answers. Around him, dozens more Shermans sit in loose rows, turrets, angled, crews waiting. They look alike in a way that feels intentional, familiar. If one breaks, another can take its place without explanation. That is not an accident. The order comes down the line. Engines rise and pitch, tracks bite. The ground trembles under 30 tons moving at once. From a distance, it does not look heroic. It looks methodical. Back in Michigan, the factory floor is just changing shifts. Eleanor hangs her gloves on a nail and rubs feeling back into her fingers. She hears the bell ring and knows another tank has cleared the line. She does not know where this one is going. She rarely does. Frank Donnelly reads a report later that week. Losses, recoveries, repairs made in the field using parts scavenged from other Shermans. He circles a line without thinking. Interchangeable components successful under combat conditions. It is not praise. It is confirmation. In North Africa, a Sherman takes a hit and keeps moving. Another burns. Crews adapt. They learn angles. They learn when to advance and when to pull back. They curse the tank's limits and praise its reliability in the same breath. Tom's tank limps back one night with a damaged suspension. By morning, it is rolling again. Parts fit. Wrenches turn. No improvisation needed. He does not think of factories when it happens. But the factory is there, in every bolt that lines up in the dark. As the war spreads, so do the Shermans. Sicily, Italy, the Pacific. Each theater finds its own use for the machine. Each exposes a weakness. Each feeds lessons back across the ocean. Some are acted on, many are not, because the clock never stops. The decision not to chase perfection becomes clearer now. There is no single battlefield, no pause long enough to redesign the war. What matters is presence. Steel where steel is needed now. In letters home, soldiers write about seeing familiar shapes roll off ships, about knowing how to fix them without thinking, about climbing into a replacement tank and feeling like it already belongs to them. That familiarity is a weapon. By 1943, the numbers become overwhelming, not just to the enemy, but to the men building them. The scale defies intuition. Tanks stack up at ports faster than ships can carry them. Crews train on rows that stretch beyond sight. Frank stands on a platform one evening, watching the line move under lights that make midnight look like noon. He realizes he no longer remembers the last time it stopped completely. Margaret's board is almost entirely green now. Problems still come. They always do. But the system absorbs them, shifts around them, moves past. Robert Hale reads field reports and closes his notebook. The Sherman will never be perfect. He has accepted that. What it is instead is constant, and constancy in war is power. As winter approaches, the clock reaches farther than anyone in that first meeting room imagined. It ticks in deserts and hedgerows, on islands ringed by reef and fire. Everywhere it ticks, a factory floor echoes faintly with it. June 6th, 1944, just after dawn. Normandy, France. Smoke drifts low over the beach, carried sideways by wind off the channel. The sand is torn and darkened. Metal lies where it fell. The sound is constant. Engines, waves, distant fire, blending into a single pressure that never fully lifts. A Sherman crawls down a ramp and into shallow water. Its engine roars, steady and familiar. The tank hesitates for half a second, then pushes forward, tracks biting into sand that refuses to hold. Inside, the crew moves without speaking much. They know the rhythm. Hands go where they are supposed to go. Levers respond the way they always have. There is fear here, yes, but not confusion. The tank is not a miracle. It is not invincible. It is present. That matters. Back in Michigan, the factory does not know the date. It knows the hour. The bell rings. Another tank clears the line. Eleanor Price has been promoted. She trains new workers now, watching their hands the way hers were once watched. She corrects gently. She insists on pace. She knows that every motion must be repeatable, even on bad days. She does not talk about Normandy. She talks about alignment. Frank Donnelly's hair has gone gray. He keeps his watch, though he no longer checks it as often. The line keeps time for him now. He has learned something the hard way. Once a system truly works, it does not need to be pushed. It needs to be protected. Margaret Lewis has moved offices twice. Her boards have changed shape, but not purpose. The flow has become global now. Steel, rubber, fuel, people, everything moving along paths carved by urgency and discipline. She knows the war will end someday. She does not know how the system will stop. Robert Hale walks the floor one last time before transferring to another project. He pauses beside a finished Sherman, resting his hand against cool steel. He remembers the arguments, the compromises, the nights spent choosing between better and sooner. History will argue those choices forever. He already knows the answer. Wars are not won by machines alone. They are won by the ability to make machines inevitable. By 1945, the numbers defy language. Tens of thousands of Shermans built, shipped, repaired, replaced, some burned, some survived long enough to be stripped and reused. Some never fired a shot. All of them mattered. Because the real achievement was never the tank itself. It was the moment American industry learned to move as one body. Factories that once competed, now synchronized. Designs that once evolved slowly were frozen and repeated until mastery replaced innovation. Civilian labor, trained and trusted, became the backbone of a war fought far from home. The assembly line became a front line, and it never made speeches. When the war finally ends, the plant slows, not all at once. Systems this large do not stop cleanly. There are still orders to finish, still parts arriving, still workers who show up out of habit. One evening, the bell rings, and nothing moves afterward. Frank stands alone for a moment, listening to the quiet. It feels wrong, too open. Eleanor removes her gloves and sets them down carefully. Margaret closes a ledger she has kept for years. Robert boards a train heading west. The world will remember battles, names, dates carved into stone. But beneath all of it lies a quieter memory. Of a factory that learned how to build a tank every hour. Of people who turned time itself into a weapon. Of a war that was decided not only by courage at the front, but by discipline, repetition, and resolve far behind it. That is the industrial miracle. Not steel, not engines, but the relentless decision to keep the line moving until inevitability did the rest.